Hi everyone, it's Dr. G back with you to talk about culture, ethnocentrism, and cultural relativism. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with a definition of culture. Culture is defined as the values, beliefs, behaviors, and material objects that together form a people's way of life. Now, there are two primary components to culture: thoughts and things. Non-material culture, or thoughts, or intangible culture, is defined as a group's ways of thinking, including its beliefs, values, and assumptions about the world, and doing its common patterns of behavior, including language and other forms of interaction. The other major component is material culture, or tangible culture, defined as the material objects that distinguish a group of people, such as their art, buildings, weapons, utensils, machines, hairstyles, clothing, and jewelry. So when I think about culture, what I think about is how it permeates every aspect of who I am. The language that I speak, how I dress, what music I listen to, how I style my hair, my values, my beliefs. Culture permeates every aspect of who we are, but unfortunately, it often goes unrecognized or even hidden. And I believe for many of us, the reason that culture goes unrecognized or hidden is because it is so much a part of who we are that we can't differentiate between us as an individual person and us as part of a larger society or culture. Okay? The analogy that I like to use is a fish in a fish bowl. And I like to use this analogy because it clearly shows us how important culture is to us and how it surrounds us all of the time, everywhere that we go. So look at the picture on the screen. You have a fish in a fish bowl swimming around. And the question to ask is, do you think that that fish understands the importance of water to its survival and how water shapes its entire life? Now, I honestly think that animals are much smarter than what we give them credit for. However, I'm not totally convinced that that fish thoroughly understands how water shapes its life and how important it is to its survival and to its being a fish. Same thing goes for us humans. Culture is all around us. And do we really stop to think about how culture shapes and molds us into who we are? Do consider that if you were born in another culture, somewhere else in the world, in a vastly different culture, you and I would be very, very different people, dressing differently, different language, we'd have a different religion, we'd have different values. And so I think one way that we can truly understand how culture influences us is to learn about other cultures. And there are many ways that we can do this by reading and watching documentaries. But I have found that one of the best ways to learn about cultures, if at all possible, is to travel and to visit other cultures around the world. I have found that not only do I learn a lot about other people and their culture, I ultimately learn a lot about myself. I have found that, up until I was about in my middle 20s, I had never traveled before. And so the only thing that I knew was really American culture. And what I believe is kind of banged into our head and shoved down our throat is that the culture that we're raised and born into and we live in is just awesome. It's the best. But part of the human experience is we often feel comfortable with what we know, and we are fearful of that which we do not know. But when we take the time to go out and visit other cultures, what we find is that, wow, I like this more than what I do in my culture. And we can make comparisons. So comparisons are very, very important in understanding who we are and how we fit into our culture. Unfortunately, one of the issues that comes up when we talk about culture is a term called ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is defined as the practice of judging another culture by the standards of one's own culture. And so here's the way that it generally works. As Americans, we look at people that live in, let's say, Africa or Asia and go, what are those people doing? Why are they doing that? Why do they believe that? And we tend to be judging. Okay? We are judging them because, again, what we do is better than what they do. Now, I'm not saying that this occurs all of the time, but generally this is part of the human condition, that my group, is better than you and your group, okay? So it's very unfortunate that it is like that, but that is the way that it often is. I want to give you a very specific example of what I'm talking about regarding ethnocentrism. And here's the example. If you ask most Americans how many children they want, the answer is 2. Actually, it's 1.8, but we're going to round it up to 2, okay? So that's the magic number. But if you were to go to a very poor country in, let's say, Africa, and ask them how many children they want, the answer is not 2. The answer is 4, 5, 6, or even more children. Now, for most Americans, we go, oh my God, what's going on? 5 children, 6 children, that's crazy. Okay, well, is it crazy? It may be crazy for us, but is it crazy for them? Why is it crazy for us? Number one, just the thought of having 5 children is enough to drive some people over the edge. Okay. Another reason is we think about people that live in Africa and we go, wait a minute, these people tend to be poor and they can't support themselves, but they're going to have 5 children. Something seems wrong there. That's not right. Okay. I'm not saying that this is what I believe, by the way. I'm just saying this is how a lot of Americans will think about this issue and how many children we want. All right, so that's ethnocentrism. Now, let's look at another concept called cultural relativism. It's defined as the practice of evaluating a culture by its own standard. So let's look at my example and let's put ourselves in their shoes. Their shoes, people that live in a poor country in Africa having 5 or more children. Why are they having so many children? Good question. Well, here are some of the reasons why they're having so many children. Number one, children are helpers. Children are put to work at a very young age. And so if the family has a farm, which they probably do, children are out working on the farm. So that helps with the economic production of the family. All right, people that live in poor countries may not have access to or knowledge about contraception. Okay, so that's another very easy reason why they may be having lots of children. Another reason is that it is part of their culture, a long history of this practice in their culture. So it's not something that you just stop overnight. Another reason is it's part of their religious beliefs. Their religious beliefs say that one of the most important things that they can do is procreate. And so they're following their religious beliefs. Yet another reason why they're having so many children is because they have high infant mortality rates, which unfortunately means that a large number of children die, okay? Because of lack of proper health care, lack of access to clean water, nutritious food, okay? So because unfortunately a large number of children die, the parents have more children to assure that they will actually have surviving children, okay? So that's an example of cultural relativism. Putting yourself in the shoes of another people in another place in the world and understanding why they do the things that we think may be wrong from their perspective. Now, I'm not saying that cultural relativism is always going to change your mind, and maybe it shouldn't change your mind. For example, women in Saudi Arabia could not legally drive a car up until just June of 2018. Okay, and until recently could not go out into public without a male escort, a brother, a father, a son. Okay, so if we put ourselves in their shoes and try to understand what they're doing, which I think we should, all right, good, we've done it, but should we walk away from that experience going, oh, it's wonderful that women can't drive a car. It's wonderful that women can't go out in public on their own. No, that may be carrying cultural relativism a little too far. Okay, my thoughts. All right, if you do decide to travel, and I do highly recommend it, it is in just one of the most awesome things that you could ever do is travel the world. You will eventually encounter what's called culture shock. And culture shock is defined as personal disorientation when experiencing an unfamiliar way of life. I have two examples up on the screen. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see a gentleman sitting on a bench in a park in Cambodia. And what is he doing? He is drinking liquid out of a bag, like a sandwich bag, plastic bag. The very first time that I saw this in Thailand, I went, wait a minute. You know, you drink liquids out of a glass, out of a paper cup, out of plastic. You don't drink it out of a baggie. But there are quite a number of countries around the world in which they do that, and seems to work for them. On the right-hand side, this is a picture that I took when I was in Australia. And when you drive down the road, what you will see is signs for kangaroos. Not something that we face here in the US when we're driving down the road. So you see those signs and you're like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I'm not at home. I need to be cautious of kangaroos running into the road. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed this short video on culture, ethnocentrism, and cultural relativism. And I hope to see you back very soon.